Welcome to What Drives You. I'm Kevin Miller. In this episode, anxiety. It's not all in your head, but probably on your plate or your screen. So anxiety is the new norm, as you know, and conventional medicine tends to view anxiety as what they call a neck up problem. That is one of brain chemistry and psychology. So all the treatments are focused there at the mind, at calming our minds, getting calm. And I agree with those as part of treatment and just a good lifestyle. But what about our overall health? How does it factor in? My guest cites that the origins of anxiety are rooted in the body. So this is Ellen Vora. She is an MD with her BA from Yale. She's a holistic psychiatrist, an acupuncturist, and a yoga teacher. She takes a functional medicine approach to mental health, considering the whole person and addressing imbalance at the root. So Ellen offers a paradigm shift in our understanding of anxiety and mental health, suggesting that anxiety is not simply a brain disorder, but a whole body condition. And it's coming just as much from what we eat and how we move and what we watch as a neck up, just chemical imbalance. More, actually. She has a book titled The Anatomy of Anxiety, Understanding and Overcoming the Body's Fear Response. That's my initial muse for this conversation you're about to hear. You can find, of course, her book, The Anatomy of Anxiety, anywhere. And you can find Ellen on Instagram at Ellen Vora, Vora, MD. Hey, when I'm not having these conversations on human potential, I'm working directly with clients on their human potential, especially in regards to their purpose. If you want to connect with me and talk about guiding you, check in with me. kevinmiller.co. Now, here are a few sponsors who make the show possible. Then drive with me a moment to consider anxiety. It's not all in your head, but probably on your plate and your screen. Let's see what we can learn for ourselves today. Ellen, it's a gift to have you here. As I've been studying your book, it just kind of brought me back to this issue of anxiety, which is, I don't know if I've seen anything get more press these days from a mental health standpoint. Anxiety. We hear that. Is it fair to say that your perspective is coming and questioning our consistent focus on it being a mind issue and saying sometimes that's a symptomatic issue and we're missing the root cause? Fair?
That's fair, Kevin. Yeah. Thank you for having me. And that's what we're here to do, is blow the roof off of the current model for how we're thinking about mental health. Because we're all taught to think it's a genetic chemical imbalance, that it exists from the neck up. And that's also a fixed mindset understanding of mental health. It says it's something about us, it's genetic, it's a destiny. And there's a lot to unpack about that, but I think it's really critically important to realize that that's our least hopeful narrative about mental health, and it's not entirely accurate. And there is so much more that goes into how we feel and how our mental health manifests. And that's the part that we can change. That's the growth mindset perspective on mental health.
And that feels like the hope to me, because as it is this focus on just our mental state and, meds and whatnot and therapy and whatnot, it seems like the thing we can least control compared to what we're about to dig into with you saying, let's look at some other areas, and the areas that I can address right now, this moment. That I appreciate. And you just mentioned that we tend to, or the medical community tends to look at it as a chemical imbalance and has trained us as the recipients in that. Whereas you are, and I literally, this was my second note, as you're looking more so or giving fair focus to the physical imbalance. Yes?
Yes. So we're taught that mental health is this brain chemistry issue. And we'll put aside the fact that decades and many millions of dollars of research has not really turned up that chemical imbalance. What's much more true and evidence-based at this point is that our mental health issues have root causes. And those root causes can be physical, and they can be what I would call psychospiritual. So when they're physical, there's some state of imbalance in the physical body. It can be anything from inflammation to chronic sleep deprivation, something off in the gut. We can just be in a temporary blood sugar crash, or we're hungover. And that can create a stress response in the body that can feel subjectively identical to states like anxiety, even panic disorder, depression. And those are the physical root causes. And I think of that as the low hanging fruit. It's the quick wins. We have to start there and address any states of physical imbalance that are masquerading as mental health issues. But then once we've cleared the air and worked through all of those physical root causes, there are also the psychospiritual roots. And that can be everything from unresolved trauma to we as human beings having certain fundamental needs that can go unmet, like our need for community, our need to have a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives.
So I experienced you as very gracious in your book and giving due merit to, when somebody's in an acute stage and really struggling, anxiety, depression, whatever, that, thank God for pharmaceuticals in that broken space. However, when that's the only tool we use and we use it nonstop, that's where we're getting dangerous. And I'm going to jump over into being unpolitically correct because it's my show, so I'll get the blame for it. That I saw something posted somewhere, some kind of a meme or a quote or whatever. And it said, I'm going to paraphrase, if you go in to see a doctor with a, mental issue, let's say anxiety or depression, and you are quickly prescribed a medication without being asked about your lifestyle. This quote was, you don't have a doctor, you have a drug dealer. That's harsh. And I agree.
Yeah. So grace is a really useful word right now because we do need to give grace to the folks out there who are on medications because, of course, you were trying to get relief from suffering. You were trying to get help.
Yeah.
I think, also want to give grace to the doctors, to the practitioners. I went through this training. That was a decade of my life that taught me no strategies other than this very limited menu, which says, these symptoms equals this diagnosis equals this treatment. And the treatment, there's two main options, medication and therapy. And I think about healing as this mountain, and there are certain paths up that mountain to a place of you feel well. Medication and therapy are paths up that mountain. Sometimes they're the right path for somebody, but they are not the only paths up that mountain. And sometimes they are a fundamentally wrong path for somebody. There's also, it gets spicy when sometimes you need one path for a period of the hike and then you need to switch to a different path. But I think that when that limited menu of options, meds and psychotherapy, works for you, that's great. I count that as a success. And I'm not here to dogmatically be against what's working for somebody. I'm just aware now, I think 12 years into practice, of the millions of people for whom that limited menu of options, those two paths up the mountain, they're not getting somebody all the way there. They're getting unsatisfactory relief from their symptoms. And I know what happens then because we're taught this narrative, which is that you have a genetic chemical imbalance. It's low serotonin. It's corrected with a pill. When that works for you, great. But when you've tried seemingly every antidepressant, every combination of medications, every dosage, then you think, but this is a genetic chemical imbalance. It's supposed to be fixed with a pill. If it's not fixed with a pill, well, then what happens? Am I broken beyond repair? And that's when people start to despair. So that's where I want to interject and scream from the rooftop, no. That was only one of the paths up the mountain. If that doesn't work for you, you are not stuck. You are not without hope. We just need to switch to a different path. And there are so many other paths.
Okay. Just a layman's term. We went with serotonin and we look at, what are they? Zoloft, name a couple of the top.
We've got Lexapro, you've got Prozac,
right?
Celexa, Paxil, the list goes on and on.
Which are, is it SSRI?
Those are the SSRIs, yeah.
Okay, so serotonin, so those are, and you just said, I'm bringing that up because you said, if you have a genetic imbalance of those, I don't know if it's a fair question. If we took a cross section in New York City of people coming along that attest to anxiety, depression, whatever, and they're on one of those meds, what would you guesstimate are the number of those people who legit have some genetic predisposition, some lack, as opposed to those who have, through an imbalance caused somewhere, which is what we're going to talk about, they've created that lack. So kind of the functional medicine concept of You're not taking an again, I'm going to be the layman, unpolitically correct person. You're not taking an SSRI because your body uniquely is lacking an SSRI pill.
Yes.
It's lacking something else over here. So again, is that percentage is a fair question. And what would you guesstimate at?
Right. Like how many people genetically are born with a Lexapro deficiency disorder?
Thank you.
I think that, so I think that, to get really as accurate as I can be, I think that when we're talking about genes, we are only ever talking about a predisposition. I'm sure you know this well. In the functional medicine world, we say genes loads the gun, but the environment pulls the triggers.
Yeah.
So there's really very rarely any such thing as a genetic destiny, anything that's genetically guaranteed. That's not to mention the fact that genes are not written in stone. This is the stuff of epigenetics, where our genes are in this ongoing dynamic dialogue with our environment, where we're going to methylate certain parts of our DNA to determine what genes we express and what genes we suppress. So nothing is fixed. We're never stuck. And what's I think really important about this is that the genetic chemical imbalance, we arrived at that we backed our way into that through the fact that certain tuberculosis medications that modulated serotonin seem to create an antidepressant effect. So for the last now, I think it's over 30 years, we've really been operating with that model of depression is serotonin. Mm-hmm. Over these decades, everyone has tried to point to that chemical imbalance and say, see, here it is. This is the gene. This is the lack of serotonin. We're looking for serotonin metabolites in cerebrospinal fluid. We're looking in all kinds of ways. We're looking at serotonin transporter activity in the brain with positron emission tomography. Many have looked. It hasn't actually turned up. So a genetic Lexapro deficiency disorder, I don't really believe exists. I do think serotonin is an important player in that very complex symphony of what creates our mood. I think if it's off at all, it's often a downstream effect of some other form of imbalance, whether that's childhood trauma, or whether that's inflammation, or anything else in between. And I think that it just limits us too much.
Yeah.
And it ends up suppressing our imagination, and we forget to look for the root causes, the part that we can change.
Okay, so it'd be fair if I go back, when I record the intro to say, okay, this show is for those who may be struggling with this or want to know about it. And if you want some agency, some possibility of altering it, this is a show for you. If you want, and this sounds so bad, but it's just realistic. You know that if you want to just let the med kind of do its thing and not mess with any other area in your life, then go watch another show. This is for those who want hope to say, do I have some control? Fair?
Let me follow that up with yes. And the 4 caveats that come to mind, if I can keep track of them all. Let's see if I can. So I think that it's not that medications do nothing. And I know that someone could be listening to this and feeling like, but I went on this medication and I do feel better. So is that all in my head, or are you just totally wrong? And, it erodes our credibility, right? So I don't actually think it's true that they do nothing. I think they do something. Correcting a chemical imbalance, I think, is way too simplistic and not what they're doing. I do find that they can narrow the range of emotion. So it lifts up the floor and it also brings down the ceiling, which is to say our lows are less low and our highs are less high. Sometimes that's helpful. Yeah. And I think about it in the best of circumstances, a medication can be like this arm outstretched that can pull someone out of a dark place. But it's not a lifelong needed correction to some fundamental disease that we have. It's a temporary intervention. And I think critically, we even as a culture need to reframe, what does improvement look like? I've had many patients come to me and say they were crying every day. They went on their SSRI and they stopped crying every day. So I guess that means they're better. I think that crying was actually the medicine, and suppressing that is not helpful. I think that it can create the semblance of health, but then we've lost that mechanism that the body uses to release. And so I think that sometimes we need that semblance of health. We need that semblance of, I'm not in such a dark place. It can help us control Alt-Delete and change direction. Going back a couple steps to Lexapro deficiency disorder. The one time where I do find that it seems like a Lexapro deficiency disorder is actually in Lexapro withdrawal. And so I've had many patients go through the following journey. They're in an adjustment time in their life. There's a divorce, there's a grief, there's a loss, there's some kind of difficult situation. We lack the coping tools, we lack the skills, we get into a dark place. They go on Lexapro. They start crying a little bit less. They feel a little blunted, a little muted. Everyone around them says, you seem like you're doing better. They think, yeah, I guess so, shrug. Then the effect maybe becomes less relevant over time. They're back to feeling like circumstances in life are not quite so bad. So they go off the Lexapro. For the first 2 weeks, they feel okay. And they're like, okay, I guess I actually didn't need that medication anymore. And then they are thrown into a very difficult state where they're irritable, they have insomnia, they're having crying spells, they're feeling anxious and sad, and maybe even having dark thoughts. And they think, oh, I was actually more depressed than I realized. That medication must have really been helping me. They go right back on the Lexapro. They feel instantly dramatically better.
Oh, right.
And then they say the following words to me. I've heard this far too many times to count. Lexapro saved my life. And I'm just allergic to the stories that we tell ourselves when they're not based in truth. What happened there was you were in acute Lexapro withdrawal, and nothing feels quite so good as scratching the itch of withdrawal with the withdrawn substance itself. So Lexapro didn't save our life in that moment. It actually rescued us from Lexapro withdrawal. So people get hooked into decades-long journeys with medications like this, where they go on them, they decide they're better, they go off of them too quickly and without appropriate support. They're thrown into withdrawal. We don't have a cultural conversation around psychiatric medication withdrawal, so they attribute the symptoms to relapse. They go back on the medication, feel better, credit the medication, and so on and so forth. The other caveat I just want to throw out there is that we're in a moment in time where we have a lot of cultural messaging around what is mental health. We have this disease model of mental health. It's an attempt to legitimize psychiatry as a real science, and it's an attempt to eliminate stigma about mental health. The spirit of this is good. What ends up happening is that we say, you wouldn't be ashamed of taking your medication for high blood pressure, so don't be ashamed for taking your medication for depression. Don't be ashamed for anything. Yes, fine. Moral things aside, I think that the tricky thing here is that mental health, as much as we would love to believe it's just a clean disease model like anything else, this is the stuff of the human condition. It's not the same thing as high blood pressure. And we do a lot of coddling right now around mental health. That's a whole longer and quite incendiary conversation. I'll just say that for now. But I think that what's happening is that for many reasons, when someone is being told to confront their understanding of mental health and to look at it differently, that's so triggering and invalidating. And then we point to our social circumstances and say, like, personal agency, like, what the hell? I'm working this many hours in this toxic of a work environment. I don't have child-sponsored childcare or government-sponsored childcare, and on and on and on. And our social circumstances are so broken that it feels really myopic to say personal agency. I think we need a both and conversation about this. We need to change our circumstances, yes. And often the only place we can begin is with personal agency. But I don't say that with sort of like unexamined privilege. I think that we need to recognize our agency, and we need to acknowledge and address all of the ways that our circumstances keep us down, and that pressure is applied differentially based on so many different social factors.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. And I'm going to walk this line of, I do want it to be compassionate and have grace and not be insensitive. And over here, I'll admit for myself, I'll own it. I want to be as well as I can be.
Yeah.
I want to be resilient. I want to be adaptable. I want to be these things, and I want my body to do what it's supposed to do. and not need a medicine. So that's me. That said, years ago, Ellen, and my listeners, I've shared this here and there. There was a moment in time when I had some pressures happening in my life. I wish I would have been. Well, I always remember the book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers.
Yeah.
Right, but I can't remember the guy's name. And he's showcasing the zebra's going along, eating grass, doing its thing, nice and chill. Here comes the lion. It takes off like a bat out of hell, runs for its life, gets nipped in the butt, and then makes it out. And what's it do after that? It goes back to eating grass and whatever. I want to be that. That's why you're on the show. I want to continue to learn how to have the best opportunity to be that. And yet, so many years ago, I didn't do that in a moment of time to where I went into my dear friend, the doctor, and said, I'm losing it. I'm going to ask for and so you may not, I'll see what you think about this. I said, I need some help. I need a crutch at the moment. I'm feeling a little broken. And he actually, we talked and he said, okay, well, we can try that. Here's I can't remember what Zoloft kind of thing. So I did that. Of course, him being who he is, similar to you, he says, okay, we'll do that, but let's now start doing the work to see what caused this so that you're not taking this for the rest of your life. Now, I did start taking something as well as doing some super addressing of the issue and looking at myself and going, oh my gosh, I am losing it. How can I get my feet back under me? I didn't necessarily feel anything from the med. Point being, though, I did it. And now I'm looking at it generally as, thank God it's there for that acute issue when I am broken. Just like, my big, I had a huge accident just over a year ago and broke everything and whatnot. Thank goodness for traditional medicine that took me into the ER, patched me up, fixed me, did all that stuff. Put my arm in a sling, but I didn't then go say, okay, I'm going to keep my arm in the sling forever. Thank goodness I got it now, but I really want to do PT and get out of this thing. So is that a fair way to look at it and go, okay, you're not saying you did a great, I think, I appreciate what you said about the SSRI. Somebody had a broken feeling, something going wrong. They may have taken the med and go, oh my gosh, it helped a lot. Awesome. But if we can, let's come back and see what was the causation that led to that deficiency or that issue that you now need a med for, and see if we can get you back to regulation. Is that
yes?
Okay.
I want to acknowledge you for admitting you needed help and seeking that out for yourself, recognizing your worthiness of getting that help. And then that practitioner, that doctor who said, yeah, let's give you this help and let's take the steps so that you don't have to be on this always. We should all be so lucky to have that go as well in both fronts. I love the why zebras don't get ulcers. And a real takeaway of that concept was that they're like 90-10 parasympathetic to sympathetic, meaning they spend most of their lives in a state of parasympathetic tone in their nervous system, rest and relaxation. 10% in holy shit, I have to run for my life. We as modern humans spend very little time with gratitude. I say this in that I am running from my life from a tiger, from a lion, but we spend about 90% of our lives in a state of low-grade sympathetic tone or stress response. So we're in chronic low-grade stress. A big thesis of my book is that we're not going to fix the chronic low-grade stressors of our society, of our day-to-day lives overnight, but there's an underappreciated role that subtle aspects of the modern world are playing in how they affect our physical body. And that becomes a contributor to our 90% of our time spent in chronic low-grade stress. So we're stressed partly because, yes, there's drilling noise outside, there's sirens going by, we have all this work pressure, we don't have enough in so many ways, we're inundated with doom scrolling and fear-mongering media, and we're in chronic stress for a lot of reasons. But I think the part that we're not talking about yet is that these subtle, seemingly innocuous aspects of modern life are getting our bodies out of balance, and that's a stressor too. And so what I mean by that, something as simple as blood sugar dysregulation. We are on a blood sugar roller coaster, all of us, because the modern American diet is built on a foundation of refined carbohydrates, coffee drinks that are secretly milkshakes, and rosé all day, where our blood sugar spikes, it's chased by insulin, it crashes. The design of the human body is to react to a blood sugar crash by secreting our stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline. It saves the day. It's a good design all in all, but it has this pesky side effect, which is that it feels identical to a stress response. It can feel like panic. It can feel like anxiety. It can feel like overwhelm. We're in and out of that all the time for kind of a silly reason. It doesn't have to be happening. I think of this as unnecessary suffering. We are going to suffer in our lives. This is part of the human experience. Let it not be for a blood sugar crash. We can avoid that one relatively easily. Avoiding it is like there's the definitive approach, which is overhauling our diet and eating more protein, more fat, a little bit less refined carbohydrates and added sugars. That's great. For some of us, we're hungry for that information. We want to make those changes. For some of us, we're in survival mode and we're having nachos for dinner. And if that's the case, there is a way to support our blood sugar in a pretty low effort way, which is that I have my patients start out by just taking a spoonful of something like almond butter or coconut oil at different points in the day to give themselves a safety net of blood sugar. Because these things that are basically fat or fat and protein, they're very slow to be digested. They're slow to be released into the bloodstream. And then you don't have a blood sugar crash, even if you're also eating refined carbohydrates. So I have patients who just start taking a spoonful before they begin their commute home from work or before they brush their teeth at night. And this is sometimes the sole intervention necessary to stop someone from having panic disorder. It's crazy what I've witnessed with this. Someone who has debilitating panic attacks frequently, it was just tied to their blood sugar. And once they started stabilizing their blood sugar, no more panic attacks. These are dramatic improvements in quality of life.
Okay. And I'm just about to dive into lifestyle issues because, as you talk there, I'm trying to figure out how to say, well, let me go back on and make it on myself. So I'll offend me instead of somebody else. That if you looked at me at that time and what I was doing and how I was living, I would say I was kind of creating a breeding ground for this anxiety to manifest at such a high level. It might have been an easier question to say, it's surprising you haven't cracked yet, Kevin, with the way that you're going on and running. So I want to jump into that. I do want to pull out, and this definition I appreciate of anxiety was in your book, and it's the anticipation of future threat. And that just was stark to me as I realized more and more that, and I'll make up a story, that let's say we're in a big house in a gated community with a refrigerator and cabinets full of food. We have a full bank account. There's family around. And yet we're on the couch with a nice duvet over us, maybe possibly with, a screen in front of us, probably. And in a gigantic anxiety attack. And right then we are physically as safe as possible. We could not be safer. And nothing's happening just right now, but it's something that we are feeling threatened by that could happen in a minute, in a day, in a future, whatever. And that's what anxiety is. And to put it that way to me is so convicting that what am I doing to myself? So I appreciate the definition in it. To me, it feels stark to look at it that way. Yeah.
And we're wired for this. And it's a good thing overall, because when that lion comes at us, when we're the zebra, thank God we have this reaction to an acute stressor. It's central to the fact that we've made it this far as a species, to our survival. The tricky thing is that I think Julia Ross really defined this term best. She coined the term false mood. The idea is that we have our real moods. That's when the lion is there. That's when we're going through a divorce. That's when we've lost someone we love. Something is happening. We're in a mood as a result. We also have false moods. That's the one we need to talk about. We get true moods. We understand that intuitively. False moods, we're not talking about as a population, and that's creating all of this unnecessary suffering. False moods happen when there's a state of physical imbalance. The way this often goes is that something tripped our body into a stress response, and our body says, okay, I'm anxious right now. I'm in a stress response. And then it starts to tell us a story. This has to do with the fact that our mind, this is what its job is to tell us a story. You show a brain a picture with 2 dots and a line, and it says, I know what that is. That's a face. And if you show our brain a stress response induced by a blood sugar crash and a bad night of sleep and a hangover, it says, I know what that is. That means I'm unsafe. And it starts to tell us a story of here's the potential uncertainty in the future that could threaten my safety. We always have stories for that. And then we're, of course, being bathed by fear-mongering media that will happily alley-oop whatever subtle fear we had right into the net. And so it's like we have so much messaging around what could go wrong, even if we're under a duvet on a couch in a safe home with a full bank account. So we're wired for this. And then we have plenty of stories to tell ourselves about why we're under threat. But what's actually happening in that moment is not that a lion is coming around the corner, not that we're actually unsafe in any way. It's that our body is in a stress response for physical reasons, because of the blood sugar, because of the hangover, because of the sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
So the lifestyle approach is to really just understand we have certain things that get out of balance, and how do we keep that intact so that we don't have unnecessary anxiety?
So as we get into that, is it fair to say, as we look at lifestyle issues, that those are what we are doing to support our ability to be more cognizant in the moment and maybe tell a better story? I'm thinking about what, go ahead.
No, yeah, please go ahead. I think that I hadn't thought about that way, and I love that way of describing it, to tell a better story.
Well, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, gosh, I just spent a week with 2 therapists. So to be fair, we've been talking, and they were getting into me a lot, just questions and whatnot. And it came up, and I kind of forgotten about it, that I was mortally scared of the dark as a kid. From ages, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, 11. I don't know what it was, but I mean, ridiculously, afraid of that. And for a parent to try to come in and not minimize it, not to, oh gosh, Kevin, you're being stupid. Come on, you're a grown boy, or whatever. They didn't do that, and you wouldn't want to do that. But I would also, being a parent myself, say, maybe we can tell a better story, and let's get into what caused this and interpret that story better. I saw a video at some point, and it was a little boy kind of holding on to a branch or something like that in the water, screaming like crazy, like he's going to drown. And a grown-up came over and really just kind of tapped him on the shoulder and said something. And I didn't even hear it, but I apparently said, hey, put your feet down, is what I translated it to be. And the kid puts its feet down and realizes it's in like 2 feet of water, and the kid's 4 feet tall. And I think, how often are we doing that? Now, I say that though, in the course, what gets dangerous is not minimizing somebody's fear, but to also, can we reframe it? Can we tell a better story? And that's when I read your book of saying, hey, how can we bolster the body through lifestyle and whatnot to help us mentally be more resilient, tell a better story. Yeah.
To tell a better story without invalidating the story that we naturally come up with.
Okay. Yeah,
I love that.
You.
Yeah. And I think just to address the scared of the dark thing, I have like 3 versions of me that respond to that. The conventional therapist part of me thinks about separation fears, and are there ways to address the attachment, address the security of that attachment with the child, so there's less fear of separation at night. The ancestral lens part of me thinks about the fact that it's really natural for children to think it's not safe for me to be alone. They want to sleep in the same bed with parents because for millennia, this is how we evolved. That's the only way to keep our offspring safe. And they know on some level, it's like, wait, so every night I'm just being abandoned in the woods? Like, how can that be safe? The witchy part of me, which I'm leaning into these days as I'm writing my second book called Season of the Witch, very different from my first book, The Anatomy of Anxiety. In Season of the Witch, I'm really thinking about how something vastly beyond our comprehension is occurring here. Is it that the kid is being irrationally afraid of the dark, or does the kid have a thinner veil and they're aware of something in that room? And, we as adults come in and invalidate that when actually maybe they have a more truer ability to see than we do as adults as we get hardened. All that said, I think that the telling a better story without invalidating the original story is central to this. I was thinking about this recently, how I was spending time with friends who have a 7-month-old, and it took me back to the days when my daughter was little. And I realized when I was trying to deal with my daughter being fussy, that it was like, there's a finite list of reasons she might be fussy right now. Maybe she's hungry. Maybe she's tired. Does she need to be burped? Is she teething? Does she have a dirty diaper? It was a finite list, but somehow I needed to write that down and put it on the fridge because whatever one I wasn't thinking of in the moment turned out to be the one that was happening.
Yeah.
And we adults, we are just oversized toddlers in so many ways. And we also have this list of ways that our sweet little bodies get out of balance. It's a longer list than for infants, but it's still relatively finite. And so in my book, I have this avoidable anxiety inventory. With patients, I work with this, but it's basically we need that list to cue our memory in that moment because we're in a moment of peak anxiety. It's not the time we have the presence of mind to be like, oh yeah, I'm in a false mood for this reason. We're just running away with the story that our mind is telling us. But a really nice dialogue we can have with ourselves using that list is basically like, whew, I'm anxious right now. It makes sense that I'm anxious right now. The mind has the story of I'm anxious because of work. I'm anxious because of interpersonal thing going on. It makes sense that I'm anxious right now. We validate that. We give ourselves permission to be anxious in that moment, but it's a both and. So we follow all that up with, and is it possible that I need a snack right now? Or, and if I look at my cycle tracker, I realize I'm getting my period tomorrow and I'm a little more tender than usual right now. Some of these ands are actionable, like, is your blood sugar crashing? Have a snack. Some of them aren't so much actionable. They might change our behaviors going forward. Like, I am more tender and depressed and anxious when I haven't gotten a good night's sleep. So maybe I go to bed earlier, take measures to support better sleep. And some of them are neither actionable nor can they change our behavior, but it's powerful to change the narrative when we realize, like, when I'm on the day before my period, everything's going to feel a little bit magnified. I'm going to be more tender. I'm going to be more irritable. And so rather than just running with the story that our mind tells us in that moment, we can just see it with that perspective. But it's not a self-flagellating perspective. It's actually very self-compassionate. We realize I'm going to have a different outlook on this day. And maybe I don't run with the stories, but maybe I create space to take an Epsom salt bath and journal and cry and feel supported by a good friend.
Okay, I keep trying to dive into the lifestyle stuff, and I keep getting hung up. So I'm still gonna hang over here, and ask you in regard, because you just said, here I'm feeling this, and it makes sense and whatnot. I'm struggling with that a little bit, even with myself. So here I am, say I'm sitting right here in my in my studio, and for whatever reason, something triggers me, and I realize, oh my gosh, I'm feeling anxiety. I am somewhat, or have been, and I'm going to ask you on that tangent that you just took, asking myself if it does make sense. And so I do need to side on self-compassion. That's not a strong point for myself. So I'm trying to do that. I'm striving to do that. And yet I also am looking, and I find myself a lot of times looking at, like, what's worst case, whatever the issue is, what's the worst case scenario? Am I a zebra and it's literally a lion and I'm about to die? Possibly. It's generally not. And without trying to minimize, also looking, gosh, I'm stressing about something and I can't really even figure out what the worst case is. What am I so scared of? It makes no sense to me. And in the past, Ellen, I've struggled even with guilt for that, of going, what the hell is wrong with you, Kevin? You're not going to die. You're not going to be homeless. You're not going to whatever. And I'm trying to reframe it because it doesn't make sense. And yet, so I'm trying to not invalidate the emotion. The emotion's there. It's here. You can see it, or I can see it. It's written all over me. And yet that doesn't make sense to me. So help me out.
Yeah. So, well, you've kind of caught me on the one fudge that I do. I have a lot of tricks that I use with myself, with my patients. And here's the thing is that, does it make sense? No. Where I'm going with this is that I think that so much of our day-to-day suffering is false. Those are false moods generated by physical imbalance. So in the sense of, does it make sense when we're trying to validate the story our mind tells us? Kind of not, but even your perfect example of this right now, if we try to invalidate that story that our mind tells us, our mind will double down. And we get into this arm wrestle with ourselves, and that's not helping anybody. So I think it's just helpful to start with that softness and that permission. And it's maybe not saying it makes sense that I'm worried that I'm going to die because I'm a little behind on this work project. I think that you're right that it doesn't make sense, but I think we can start with a little self-compassion of just like, yeah, I'm stressed right now. I'm stressed. There's this thing. I'm not going to die because of this thing, but it's stressful. I'm not really sure if I have enough time or have enough skill or if I will be okay with this. I'm not going to end up dead in the gutter. We usually, if we really play out the eventualities of our fears, it usually ends in some way of dying, suffering, or losing someone we love. Those are kind of the worst case scenarios. And we can even adjudicate that concept if we want, get a little metaphysical about it. But I think that it's more just not to say it makes sense that we're afraid we're being eaten by a lion when in fact it's just a work deadline. But we want to start with softness and validation, partly just as a psychological trick with ourselves, because if we try to strong arm that, our brain will just double down on the story, but also just gentleness with ourselves. I had the patient, I actually saw her earlier today. She was the one who coined this term years ago. She said, this feels like couples therapy between me and my body. And I think we have to do that sometimes. Imagine going
I
into,
like that.
Right? She's a genius. And imagine going into an argument with our partner and our partner is saying, I'm frustrated with you because you never load the dishwasher. And if we respond to that and say, like, I always load the dishwasher, then we're sort of just at a stalemate. And so we kind of want to open with the body and be like, okay, you feel like I never load the dishwasher. Is there a version of reality where that's kind of true? And we want to just start with that softness. And our body's going to tell us the story. The story has validity, opening with a softness around that, but then being sure to follow it up with the both and of, yeah, like we have that work deadline and we have this source of a false mood. And that's the thing we can do something about so that we're more resilient in the face of this work deadline.
Okay, the whole thing, couples. I said to myself, couples therapy with myself. It feels really funny and really significant. I'm going to keep playing with that. You know, Ellen, last week again, I was in Hawaii. Spent a week with working on a project with a couple of therapists, and found myself even in excitement. I mean, we were completely safe. Everything was completely good, completely positive. I'm all impassioned with something and realizing my shoulders are up to my ears. And it's even like a state of a state of anxiety. And we used some levity with it, but it was kind of like, what the hell is going, chill out. And even that propensity to anxiety ourselves, even around something positive, I interest myself with.
So first of all, Hawaii, amazing paradise, right? Also jet lag, also not in our normal routines, also dehydrated from the flight, also and. So many false moods come with travel.
Yeah.
And if we have any in a sort of Ayurvedic conceptualization of it all, when we travel and change time zones and go in the air in a plane, this is very Vata exacerbating. The doshas in Ayurveda, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Vata is more prone to anxiety. And if we have that quality, then when we travel and change time zones, it's going to exacerbate that Vata quality. And we're going to be more prone to anxiety. There's also a kind of anatomy of anxiety 3.0 thing coming up here. So I'll just say it in case it's useful for you or anybody listening. There's a two-way street between our moods and everything happening in our physical body. And sometimes we're just sitting in an awkward, ergonomically suboptimal couch looking at a laptop because we're working on a project. And the position of our neck, of our shoulders, of our trapezius, of our jaw is not in a great alignment. It starts to impact how well we can breathe. It starts to create tension in this musculature around the head and neck that our body associates with stress. Imagine if you see a dog that's about to fight, tenses its jaw, it growls. That is a response to stress, but it also is a feedback loop where it tells the brain we're about to throw down. And when we are in our modern lives and we're clenched in our jaws and our shoulders and we're focused on a screen, this is sending a lot of feedback back up to our brain that we're about to have a fight. We're not. We're just working. But it's muscular somatic data that our brain associates with stress. And so in those moments, even just like a break from the laptop, shaking it off, making sure that we have a dignified spine, making sure we're taking deep, slow diaphragmatic breaths, just setting ourselves up for that two-way communication between the body and the brain, where the body is communicating back to the brain. Everything's copacetic. We're okay.
With that, okay, I'm going to take that I am, see if this flows. I word pictures and analogies. I help myself with a lot. And so here is my brain, my mind, and it is set to look at, well, you said like that, stress responses, and you said a feedback loop. It's supposed to do what it does, and it's sensing all these stimuli, external and internal. It's doing its thing. And in a perfect scenario, it's judging, or, it's auditing these and they go, is this a real threat or not? And it's doing its thing. And if I was all perfect, it would do that. And I would have appropriate responses and inappropriate, or, you said false moods, and those would be easily discerned. So here I am with my lifestyle. And you just mentioned, when I went to Hawaii and the jet lag, and for me, it was public transportation. I don't have great joy in, and I can wind myself up with the baby crying and the person who's apparently thinks the back of my seat's a gymnasium and such things. So all these things. And so my brain would hopefully do what it is, but through my lifestyle, through the things that I'm dealing with, I have the possibility of opening the door for malfunction, for a false thing to happen. And so when I have poor sleep, and this is getting into the crux then of your book, looking at the lifestyle things, I slept poorly or very little, which I did, there and back. I ate poorly or didn't eat, and as I did go in there. And then there were some stimulants that for me were not a negative experience, and on and on and on. That the door is open, and it would be, I'm thinking back now that next time I do that, I'm going to have like a day where I get somewhere and I have a day of recovery, let all that stuff deal with itself so I can get back. But, through life in general, is that a relevant way to look at it? We have the possibility to open the door for problems, or keep that door shut by, again, I use that word, bolstering our body. That's the way I tend to think of it. Is there another way that you would term it?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Okay. And I think that it's a cumulative process. And so when, like in my book, I even give practical tips for travel, because that one brings up it's a perfect storm of getting our physical body out of balance. We're not bolstered. We're not stable. And then the smallest thing can send us over the edge. So it's probably a good time for us to talk about lifestyle. Like, what can we realistically do?
Let's go.
We talked about blood sugar. We covered that one. Sleep is my first line for most people, because in the modern environment, it's really hard for us to be in a good relationship to sleep. Not because we have some genetic, neurologic, organic sleep disorder, but because we have what I would call modern insomnia. It's insomnia related to the modern environment. This comes down to light. On that proverbial savanna of human evolution, we couldn't get light wrong. It was bright outside sunlight during the day, and it was a strong signal of darkness at night. This is critical because we have an internal clock in our brain. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and it's not connected to a cell tower. That's not how it knows what time of day it is. Our internal clock knows what time of day it is purely because it's connected to our eyeballs. So whatever light is coming in through our eyes, that's what's informing our internal clock about, is it morning? Is it nighttime? And we couldn't get that wrong on that savanna of evolution. And I don't blame evolution for not anticipating the plot twist, which is that we were going to harness electricity and invent the light bulb and eventually the iPhone, and then nobody was going to sleep anymore. So that's what we're up against right now. And the onus is on us as individuals to flip the script and make sure we're giving our eyes the correct light so that our sweet little brains know if it's daytime or nighttime. That starts first thing in the morning. You just want to take a circadian walk in any form, but you actually want to see sun, not through a car windshield, not through a window, not through sunglasses, but the real thing. Unadulterated sunshine, but it can be for a couple minutes. I have to make this realistic in my life. I'm not taking a 20-minute walk along the ocean, watching the sunrise. It's not practical for most of us. I drop my daughter at school, I turn around, and whatever patch of cement in New York City has managed to get some sun poking through, I stand there, I take off my glasses that have the blue blocking lenses, and I just stand there and take in that sun for a minute or two. Yeah. That's enough to tell the brain, this is morning, and to tick in the background, programming the brain to get tired at night. But then what we do after sunset, I think, is most critical because we evolved with darkness. We could see fire, we could see moonlight. These days, we are surrounded by the psychedelic light show of modern life. So we have the overhead lights on, laptop open, TV screen, we bring the phone into the bed. And all of that is sending this very confusing message. Our bodies are tired. They know they've been awake for a certain number of hours. But then this blue light resembling the daytime sky is coming in through our eyes, and our sweet little brains are getting confused. They're like, I thought I was tired, but can't argue with the sunrise. There it is. So I guess suppress the melatonin, secrete the cortisol, feel wide awake. And that's why it's so hard for us to get tired and fall asleep at the right time. So the solution is quite simple. We actually just need to move off the grid, homestead, raise chickens, make our own sauerkraut, and throw our phones deep into the ocean.
Let's do it.
Let's
That's
do
perfect.
it. In Hawaii is a great option. If that's not realistic in the next day or two, we need a harm reduction strategy for the interim. And I think the best we've got, I'll model. The harm reduction strategy is blue blocking glasses. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good in that it can block blue spectrum light, so we're no longer suppressing our melatonin release in the evening. And so I put these on. I actually have a pair that look less orange. I wear them starting at sunset. I put these on closer to bedtime, the ones that look more orange. And then that protects my brain's ability to secrete melatonin. I can still get tired, fall asleep at the right time. And these are some of the things I do to protect sleep and what I have my patients do, because sleep, even though we think that mental health impacts sleep, which is also true, sleep impacts mental health. And it's the easier entry point to fix. We could try to do meds and psychotherapy for 7 years to fix the anxiety in order to fix the sleep. Or we could spend a couple days making small strategic shifts to fix the sleep. And then often that fixes the anxiety.
I'm enamored by that. I have a wearable device and track my sleep patterns, and I just watch it fold fold out during the day of my ability, specifically, kind of like you, a lot of my work, almost all of it is creative. I'm creating. And if I'm lacking in sleep, it just won't work. I can sit there and deal with busy work, emails, whatever. But to actually create, I just fail in doing it well if my sleep is encumbered in any way. I think the same thing with critical thinking and making decisions and on and on. And I want to set up. So for those who are not homesteading out on the savannah, you're in a high rise in New York City. Set up and bedtime's 10. Yeah. Okay. Take us through a scenario there of preparation for a good night's sleep, going to bed prepared for your best opportunity.
Yeah. So even built into that is actually one of the strategies, which is that bedtime is 10. So I think a big part of why we're also struggling to get tired at the right time is that we're getting overtired. This is a concept I only learned once I had a child. Kids, babies, they rub their eyes, they yawn. And I had to slowly learn the hard way that that's not cute. That's like a low-key emergency, because a tired baby will fall asleep. They're in a finite window when their body's perfectly tired. And if you miss that window, they become overtired. Suddenly they're crying inconsolably and they won't sleep. We adults, oversized toddlers, yet again, we also have this window in the evening when our body's perfectly tired. It happens approximately 3 hours after sunset. So it'll vary by time of year, by where we are on the globe. And we're all a little different in terms of chronotypes, but not a ton. 3 hours after sunset is a good frame of reference. And then when we notice that we are yawning, rubbing our eyes, that's our window. And many of us routinely push past that. We get overtired every single night. We get hit with a second wind, and then we're tired but wired, and we toss and turn, even though we were tired all day. So actually, if we see our tired signs, we want to drop what we're doing, change our diaper, get ourselves into our cribs before it's too late. So the 10 p.m. bedtime is great, or depending on what's 3 hours after sunset, where you are in the time of year that it is. The routine I go through, I put my blue blockers on at sunset. I wear them until bedtime. I start with ones that just look like regular glasses. I move on to these ones that are more orange. I take magnesium glycinate at bedtime. I'll usually take a hot shower about an hour before bed, because that transition from heat into a cold bedroom is another helpful way to cue the body getting sleepy because we associate that with what happens after sunset when we're outdoors. So the temperature of the ambient air lowers a few hours after sunset. And apart from that, I mean, I don't bring my phone into the bedroom. That's a big one, because when it's on our bedside table or like clutched to our chest while we sleep, it's blue spectrum light suppressing our melatonin. Our social media apps are ingeniously designed to have no natural stopping cues. So we scroll endlessly. We never think to ourselves, oh, look, I got to the end of TikTok. Let me put my phone to the side at this wholesome hour and go to bed. So we are being looped into staying up later than we otherwise would because of social media. And these days it's doom scrolling. So we feel surrounded by danger. That's no condition to fall asleep. So just setting up the charger somewhere else in the home, kissing your phone goodnight, like at around 9 o'clock, 9:30, like, phone, I love you. I'm going to miss you. And then I enter my bedroom without my phone, read something life affirming, and go to bed. And that's it. It can really be about as simple as that. I like these set it and forget it, minimal effort strategies that leverage an ancestral perspective on understanding the body wants to sleep. The body knows how to sleep. They're just aspects of our modern environment that are making it really hard to get tired and sleep through the night. And so I try to get strategic around that.
You mentioned electricity, or the dawning of electricity, which we can cite so many problematic issues, back towards. I think about that a lot. And even the nighttime, I think you said the word transition, to look at that. And I was thinking about, I think I'm out here in Colorado. Sunset is maybe 6:30 right now. I don't make it 3 hours. At 9 o'clock, at least, I'm ready for bed, and I've got my system. And I even thinking about that, though, that light, I've been aware, or thinking it, because I was at some different places, and even the propensity just to have bright lights on at night, as opposed to, no, this would be a time for dim lights. The place that I was with, I do that at home, but then the place that I was with in Hawaii for 9 days, that's all they used was dim side lights, candles. They actually had a chandelier of nothing but candles.
Oh.
I know. I love it. I need to do that. And it's just how it helped the transition so well. And yeah, I go to bed and I read a hard copy book. I love it. I use a little bitty book light is part of my gig too, that helps me just wind down. We have to work on the kids. We have to literally set boundaries, that this is when screens go off and they can play a card game or something, or read a book or whatever, and help them in that. And I see the difference. There's times when we have not done that well, and I can just see it in their behavior, bottom line, and see it in their anxiety.
Kids are really helpful weather vanes in many ways, because whatever is dysregulating in the modern world, it shows up in such a pronounced way in children. And it's happening to us too, but we have compensatory measures. We can kind of steamroll over some of those signs. But with kids, when their blood sugar crashes, when they're eating something inflammatory, when they're staying up late on a screen and not getting enough sleep, it shows up right away. It's very clear data. Yeah. And I think you mentioned something else there. The book light. I do love an orange clicky book light, which, details like this make a difference. If we're reading under some kind of bright blue quality LED, it's going to be disrupting our serotonin release, our melatonin release. And so we do want to be strategic about even the quality of light that we're seeing in the evening.
It's fun out here in Colorado. This is where, it seems like America comes to camp, and we do that a lot as well. And it's always interesting to watch all of us and how we act differently when we're camping. And we've got, a fire, we're usually sitting around. And so with that, we don't want any extraneous lights on, and often don't have them there. And to see how at a pretty reasonable time, everybody's ready to go to bed. And
isn't it interesting?
When the light comes up, everybody's ready to get up. And it's a good barometer.
Two things on that. One is, I think we're hardwired to see fire at night, because that was keeping us safe. It was protective in so many ways. And then camping, I think of as the hard reset for a very dysregulated circadian rhythm. So if someone puts all these diet lifestyle practices into place, tries to sleep better, and they're still not sleeping better, go camping for a couple of days, no artificial light, daylight during the day, witnessing the sunrise, witnessing the sunset, seeing fire, total darkness at night, being close to the earth. All of these factors can get someone's dysregulated circadian rhythm right back on track.
Okay, I want to go into food next. You just reminded me, though. I just had a story told to me in the past couple of weeks, and somebody was talking about. I think it was a grandson that they had, who a grandson in their 20s or not or whatnot. Lived here in America, whatever city, drug addiction, mental health problems, yada yada. Who went to some other country? Can't remember the details. And it was a camp, a kind of a retreat like this that was there was no cell phones, no internet, no whatever. And I could make it up. I don't remember the exact details, but the quick amount of days or, short amount of days that it took. And it was a new kid. It was a new kid who stopped their meds, and just recalibrated, just as you said, or you said a reset, but just recalibrate. And it was being told to me as just unbelievable. There was no specific therapy or whatever. They were just kind of put out in nature and let nature do its thing. And now again, not to minimize that and to say that that would be the cure all. It's interesting to look at that. And that's what I feel like you're in a sense saying, okay, we're not going to do that, but what can we do to help support ourselves to the greatest degree?
Yes. I think there's just before we go to diet, like the ways that we are not our best selves when we're in withdrawal from anything. And our screens, our social media, our video games, all of this, it's not only impacting sleep and hormone release and melatonin and a bunch of things just in that purely material sense, but it is also so addictive that, with my daughter, when we take away a screen, the way she's dysregulated it's not her. There's like she's hijacked in this other way. She's clearly in a withdrawal state. And to me, it just speaks to how toxic and how addictive these screens are, because it puts us we become junkies in withdrawal when we take it away.
Yeah. Agreed. And I've got older kids as well. I just had one recently. Let's see, she's 24. And I told her, hey, I shared this thing with you because Instagram's the one place that I will go on. I actually follow everybody who's on the show. I follow. So I'll go there and we're sharing, shows, collaborating. So I will go there. And so sometimes I'll see something and share it with a couple of my kids. And I said, hey, I shared it with you. She said, oh, I just got off social media a few days ago. She's in tune enough that she did get to that place, but then also realized this doesn't feel good and got off. So, so proud of her. So grateful. Yeah. For her own health and wellness. Food. I want to hit that, though. I actually wanted you to start off and address and go ahead and let's stick on the nighttime regime transition and address food within that as well. And then we'll hit food at large in regards to, again, my own perspective of how it can help or hurt us in bolstering, supporting what our mind would hopefully do well in a healthy state.
Yeah. So food vis-a-vis sleep in the evening, eating dinner a little bit earlier is a great change that we can make. Late dinner means that our body's really tending to digestion. It's not a great state for falling asleep. It's makes it harder on a lot of levels. And if we can possibly take a 5, 10, 30-minute walk around the block after we eat dinner, that fundamentally changes the whole milieu in our body away from insulin resistance toward insulin sensitivity simply by activating the muscles in our legs. And for somebody who's not yet eating a diet that's blood sugar stabilizing, having a spoonful of something like coconut oil or almond butter right before you brush your teeth at night is a great way to use food to leverage stable blood sugar overnight. There are things like tart cherries, like almonds. There's all different ways to kind of hack melatonin from food. But I generally think that that's not how I ever want to think about food as like this dietary supplement you're going to reach for. I really think about it as we need to get back to a way that we think about food as this opportunity for nourishment. It's the nutritional scavenger hunt that we're playing every day, where we do need to check all these boxes, because good mental health is just a reflection of healthy brain function. And a healthy brain requires vitamins, minerals, nutrients. We get it from our food. So we do want to eat nutrient-dense food, but we want to navigate that not according to what pop science article told us tart cherries can help us secrete melatonin. Tart cherries are great, but we want to listen to what is our body yearning for. And I think of it as there's two types of yearnings. There's yearning for real food, which is usually our body wisely navigating us toward the nutrients that we need in that moment. And then there's yearnings for drug-like foods. So if our body's like, I really need a juicy steak and a pile of mashed potatoes right now, those in my book are real foods. And that is your body speaking to a need for things like iron, things like protein, things like starch. But then sometimes the body's like, what I really need right now is
Ben and
pizza
Jerry's.
and red wine, Ben and Jerry's. And
Yeah.
so that is actually just the fact that a lot of our foods behave like drugs. They are engineered to be hyperpalatable. They put us in a withdrawal state. So when we're yearning for those, it's sometimes just yearning for the substance we're withdrawing from. And sometimes it's yearning for the comfort, because those are addictive partly because of a neurochemical effect they have on us. Sometimes it's even an opiate effect. And then that's really speaking to a deeper non-nutritional yearning. Do I actually need a good cry? Do I need a hug? Do I need to talk about my feelings with someone who sees me and accepts me and I feel a sense of belonging? The original opiate hit is actually breast milk. It's like the original association of something delicious and soothing, a comfort food, is with being an infant held in a mother's arms nursing. And that is comfort and love and safety and nourishment all at once. So we come by our Ben and Jerry's cravings honestly, but as adults, while we're trying to navigate the fact that, is it always the act of radical self-love to eat this? We just want to think about what might be the deeper yearning. And is it that this is the food my body needs right now? Is it that I'm addicted to this drug? Or is it that I need a hug? And sometimes it's some combination.
That one, I watch myself sometimes and look at, is it something that my body's really looking for? It's my mind, even from, a comfort standpoint, that I want that glass of wine, not even for the alcohol. It's just, it means, it means peace and celebration or something like that. And then realize that I could really it's a placebo, and I would feel the same way really with a non-alcoholic wine. Or a non-alcoholic drink of some type. And it's just it's the routine or the ritual of sitting and sipping something and reflecting on the day.
And those routines, the routines can be great. And I think that those rituals are beautiful. And so we just have to navigate all of these dicey decisions through the lens of what is the choice of radical self-love in this moment. Sometimes it is the glass of wine. Sometimes it's the seltzer. Only we can really know for ourselves. We just deserve to have informed consent about that. We'll put a pin in the sort of science behind what's alcohol doing to us. But I think that what's really happening in that moment is, we want a ritual. We want to mark the end of the day. We want to decompress. We should have those rituals. We just deserve to know what rituals are going to lift up how we feel and then keep us lifted versus the rituals that will lift up how we feel and then drop us lower than we started out. Yeah. Alcohol is one of those.
Yeah. Ice cream. I mean, that's a great desire. I really enjoying ice cream, and I know it's going to wreck my sleep. I mean, it's just at this point, so if I do it, it's less, it's earlier. And for the most part, it's just every couple of weeks. But then I can watch it. I can watch it on my wearable device that it does not do a body good.
There's so much to unpack even just with that. Because I think that we nationally have this confusion about food. We're living in the wake of decades of mixed messages and conflicting media headlines and telling us like, here's the healthy food and you should be vegan and you should be this. And we're just dizzy with all the different confusing messages. We've lost so much connection with what's real food. You did an amazing, I think, multi-part episode about Michael Pollan's work and what is it to eat food, what's food. And I think that eating real food, I used to just say that, like, eat real food and avoid fake food, until I realized that we're so confused about what's real food. And because things that are marketed as healthy, we think surely that must be better. Or even if we go out with the spirit of, okay, I'm going to eat real food, we balk at the first choice of, okay, what milk do you want with your coffee? Do you want oat milk or do you want whole milk or cream? And it's like, we think, okay, I'm going to try to eat real food. And we think oat milk, that must be the healthier choice, right? But it's not the real food. Now, dairy is a complicated conversation on its own. We'll come back to that. But the realer food there is actually whole milk or cream. If we want to eat our eggs, the real food version is a whole intact egg with the yolk, but we've been indoctrinated with the idea that we should limit dietary cholesterol. We think surely this vegetable spread is better for me than butter. So we have the spirit of let me try to eat real food, and we go wrong because we're deeply indoctrinated with messaging about these ultimately processed, highly processed foods being the healthier choice than the real thing, because we really got the memo that the real thing is going to cause a heart attack. And so we avoid real foods, because when I say, like, I'm this like blonde lady in wellness saying eat real food, and people think what I mean is chia seed pudding and an oat milk matcha latte and a pile of arugula. That's what they think I mean by real food. I mean bacon and eggs and butter and cream and fruit and honey and bone broth and collagen. That's what I mean by real food. And it's not what anybody thinks is what's healthy.
I just was writing down, thinking about that. Here in, maybe everywhere, but here in Colorado in the mountain towns, and you go out and, beer and burgers and whatnot. And of course, all the burgers places now have the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Burger and whatnot. And if I'm going to do that, I'm going to side with the Bison Burger, or lately we've gotten into a little bit yak. We have some yak farms, and I love the taste of it. We got some chiropractors here in the office who hunt, and they just got a moose and brought moose meat in. And that was different, but that's real food. And even here, as we look at, and I know there's some other environmental ramifications around the concepts of meat and whatnot, red meat and everything. But just for my body, I question, the Impossible Burgers and the whatnot. And it's a dramatically highly processed food. It is not natural.
It's not natural. Yeah. And we market it as healthy, to me, is usually a red flag.
Absolutely.
And I think that it is a complicated conversation, the environmental impacts of different foods, but it's not as simple as eating animal foods is bad for the environment. It's a whole delicate, complicated mixture. I think that for environmental and ethical and health reasons, I don't touch factory farmed meats or eggs. I think of that as abhorrent animal husbandry practices. So ethically not good, environmentally atrocious, and also bad for our own health. And so I pay more for better sourced meat, and I eat less of it. And to me, that's a nice combination. We don't need to be eating a steak the size of our head necessarily. I think that the inclusion of animal proteins is more important than how much. And so it can be a smaller amount of better source protein. And in a weird way, because I order this frozen from a place called White Oak Pastures, which is a really good animal husbandry, great sourcing. And it's less expensive than if I were just buying this at the grocery store in New York City where I live, even though it's dramatically better quality. But just that supply chain lends itself to a more affordable product.
Say the name of the company again. I'm going to write it down.
I want to make sure I was saying it right. I think where I order from is called White Oak Pastures. Love to give them a shout out because I think they do great work.
Okay, I will.
I have no affiliation to that or anything.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, we'll get one for you. Sponsorship. When I'm looking even at the part 2 of your book is called False Anxiety. And you start off with the anxiety of modern life. And I think we've hit that some, but just the propensity that we have, this anxiety breeding culture. When you look at the headlines, that's interesting. We know social media is mainly gloom and doom, but the headlines I don't normally look at. I did recently because I have family in Florida, and they just went through this hurricane, and my son and daughter-in-law were evacuated, and all that. Everybody's good. But, so I did again, and, I'm looking at it and going, oh my gosh, it just hit me again that the newspapers are not paid to provide news. They are paid to get hits. And so the amount of dramatization, my sister's there and she's going, holy smokes, the amount of drama they're making this, we're actually here. And right now it's really nice. It's not a problem. Now, again, I know some people, gosh, there, apparently some actual deaths, and there were property destruction in some areas. So I don't want to minimize it, but the anxiety of modern life. And then you go into Tired and Wired, which we just hit on. And then, well, actually two down is Food for Thought. But then you also had tech. That's an interesting term, texiety.
Yeah.
Just with tech. And then, Body on Fire. I mean, Give us that. Give us the layman's terms of when you look at anxiety, that is the topic of the book, and you're looking at lifestyle. I should have done this earlier. Maybe we'll just post it or we'll cut and paste and put it back up there. But give us the primary pillars, if you will, that you're focused on.
Yeah. So when I'm talking to a patient about their false anxiety, I'm looking at blood sugar. I'm looking at their relationship to caffeine and alcohol. It's not that all caffeine is bad. We just need to be strategic about the relationship. I'm looking at inflammation. I think we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Gut health, micronutrient deficiencies, and dietary intolerances, which overlaps with inflammation. Looking at the quality of their sleep. Are they moving their bodies? Are they getting any sunshine? Are they dancing? Do they, let me think about this. Are they breathing through their nose? Things along those lines. Another big false anxiety is just the way our bodies pharmacokinetically work with certain psychiatric medications and other types of medications. So like birth control is one that comes up a lot in my practice. A lot of people are, I look at their chronology of their mental health and it's like, okay, they got depressed or anxious starting when they were 19, when they first went on the birth control pill. And it's an interesting path. I've seen many of my patients go down. It's like first they started on the pill, and then 2 months later, they were complaining to their primary care doctor that they were feeling sad and crying more or having panic attacks. And then they go on an SSRI. And then it's not until they're 28 and washing up to shore in my practice that I'm thinking, hey, wait a minute. Did your entire mental health history start a month after you went on birth control pill? And so we take them off the pill. We find another contraception method. And it turns out they no longer really identify as someone who's depressed or anxious. It was all a side effect of exogenous hormones. Hormones are powerful. We know this. PMS is powerful. That's hormones impacting our mood. And breathing through the nose, just to explain that one a little bit better, this is really the work of James Nestor, his book, Breathe, Better Breath. And it's basically that through multiple generations of eating soft processed foods, our jaws are underdeveloped, which means our hard palate and our airway are not properly formed, and we're not breathing through our nose during the day, but perhaps even more critically while we sleep at night. So there's steps we can take to promote nose breathing. Sometimes that's anything from working with a functional manual therapist who can start broaden the palate. Sometimes it's getting a dust mite cover on your pillow so you're not congested. And sometimes it's mouth taping just to help retrain a body that's habituated to breathing through the mouth to start to breathe through the nose. Something like that can make an enormous difference. The one other thing I wanted to say about the pharmacokinetics is that I have a lot of patients who say they take their SSRI first thing upon waking in the morning. They might wake up already in a panic. Their heart is racing, their thoughts are racing. They're already anxious the minute they open their eyes. And I think it's really powerful to recognize that is sometimes something called interdose withdrawal. So that's just the pharmacokinetics. Your body is at its pharmacologic nadir or low point right before you take your next dose. And if you happen to be a little bit more of a rapid metabolizer, you're going to be in mini withdrawal upon waking. And that can put the body into a false state of anxiety. It's not like we fix that necessarily. As long as you're still taking that medication, you're still going to be in that dance with withdrawal. But to know that is powerful, because instead of just going on the magic carpet ride of, oh God, everything is doom and gloom, then we can start to work with that and say, okay, this is actually the false mood of withdrawal. I'm going to take my medication. Things will start to feel better within an hour. And knowing that can sometimes shift our perspective in a critical way. Texiety, go ahead, yeah.
No, please go.
Texiety, I think there with the news, with the media headlines, is just really important to recognize we are living in the attention economy, which is to say our attention has become the commodity being competed for by very smart companies, and they know their behavioral psychology. So they're preying on our fear response, making us feel uncertain, making us feel a doubt about our safety. And it's all for this somewhat banal reason. It's just so that we will rubberneck and hand over an increasingly large share of our attention, because that's how they get more clicks, more eyeballs, more ad revenue. But it just so happens that our mental health is the collateral damage. Yeah. So we just have to be so proactive and thoughtful about our relationship to the phone and social media, because it's destructive to our mental health. And it's not because someone's necessarily trying to harm us. It's because they're trying to keep the lights on in their office. And so we just have to navigate that eyes wide open. I think if we do nothing else, protecting that last hour before bed, making that time sacred when we're not doom scrolling has a really high ROI. And so that's usually a good way to start in terms of our relationship to the fear-mongering media headlines.
Again, I was thinking about that as I looked at headlines recently that I don't normally, and realizing that when I click on whatever it is, CNN or Fox or USA Today or myriad of news sources out there, that the minute that screen pops up, I just became a dollar sign. I just made them money. They just won. And not even to say they're bad people. Yeah, they're folks that are doing their job and feeding their kids or whatever, but just that aspect. And there was somebody, I'm remiss, I can't remember who pointed that out. There's somebody, a journalist, an author who had the book. Do you remember where? But it was based on that as soon as you do that, you're a dollar sign. Somebody kind of coined that. I cannot remember who it is.
I think there is an ex-Google exec who writes about this in a very smart way.
Okay.
He talks about like, use the phone, don't let the phone use you.
Okay. Yeah. And reading about the folks that create that stuff who don't let their kids participate because they know. Yeah. So that one there, you mentioned inflammation. We had, I don't know, last year or something, I had Dr. Tom O'Brien on the show, and he was promoting his docuseries inflammationequation.com, I think is what it was, and talked about inflammation. And he is pretty bold with citing, here's all of chronic illness disease, and he attributes almost all of them to inflammation. But to look at that, I don't know how much we talked about anxiety, but how interesting would it be to see the increase in chronic illness and disease, and right alongside it, the increase in mental health, especially anxiety. So and folks, you can go back and listen to that, him talking about inflammation and really looking at diet, but also just looking at, how we live our lives and stress and the things that inflame us. It's not just the bad food. It's also our lifestyles. So as we do that, back to talking about open doors, I mean, it's just an anxiety breeding ground. We're sitting here constantly inflamed. That alone, I mean, it's got to be that's the mental, that's where it goes. And it creates anxiety. My body's on fire, as you even say in your book. My body is on fire, inflamed, and anxiety goes right along with it, which primarily, well, I'll ask you, I think I still tend to think primarily towards food with my inflammation. But I know it's just as relevant to look at the stress in my life from a relational aspect or finances or whatnot. So go with it.
Let's get into it. So right. I remember this, you just made me realize something I haven't thought about in decades, which is one of the first patterns I recognized in med school was, why is aspirin always listed as something that can improve various chronic diseases? And it's because it really just shuts down inflammation. And so I started to think okay, everything is just related to inflammation. So here's the thing. We were saying at the beginning of our conversation that this so-called serotonin imbalance that we're trying to look for, we're trying to point to it. We can't really find it. That's the monoamine or serotonin hypothesis for depression. And it's not actually evidence-based as much as it's the consensus narrative about mental health. What's much more substantiated by the evidence is something called the cytokine or inflammatory hypothesis of depression. And in this one, we see that the degree to which we have inflammatory molecules coursing around our bloodstream correlates with mental health conditions like depression, like anxiety. We also know that these cytokines are inflammatory molecules that can cross the blood-brain barrier. They can interact with the fear center of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala basically perceives this as we are under attack, increase anxiety levels. So when we're inflamed, we're anxious, we're depressed. A really interesting reason or explanation for why inflammation would make us feel depressed tracks back to, again, that evolutionary savanna, where if we were suddenly acutely inflamed, like we drank the wrong pond water, we have a bad microbe in our body, and suddenly we're inflamed, the adaptive response would be to want to socially isolate from the tribe because we might be infectious. We want to go rest in our cave because darkness and rest are the conditions under which our immune system functions best, and feel malaise, have appetite changes, just generally feel a little ugh so that we can get better. That's the adaptive response to acute inflammation. that happens to look an awful lot like what we call depression.
Mm.
And the hypothesis really goes that we are in modern life in a state of chronic low-grade inflammation just existing in the modern world.
Yeah.
And that is creating a state of chronic low-grade depression for so many of us. So what do we do to be less inflamed? I would say it's like a 3-part plan.
Okay.
We want to reduce inflammatory exposures through the diet. That's everything from, I can't believe this has become controversial, but seed oils. For some of us, conventional American gluten. For some of us, dairy, though that's a longer conversation to be had around dairy. Sometimes it's the effects of sugar on the microbiota. That's kind of getting more layered and nuanced. And then adding in things that soothe the inflammation in our bodies: turmeric, sauerkraut, kimchi, the fermented foods. All of this is beneficial. But then this last part is recalibrating the immune system, because modern life, if it is anything, it is a dysregulated immune system. Our immune system is this powerful machinery, and it's missing basic training. It's misfiring. We have an overreaction to benign stimuli, which is what we call seasonal allergies. We have a attack on our self tissue, which is autoimmune disease, which is epidemic. And then we're even not properly responding to formidable pathogens, what we see in cases like chronic Epstein-Barr virus, long COVID. So our immune system, powerful machinery, really poorly trained these days. The way an immune system gets trained and the way it remains properly calibrated has to do somewhat to vitamin D levels, but we're not getting sunshine. And then what is happening in our gut. And in our gut, we optimally calibrate our immune system when we have a diverse ecosystem of bacteria, fungi, parasites in our gut. These days, that's really off. Most of all, we just have a paucity of diversity. We have decimated our gut flora, partly because we take multiple courses of antibiotics, partly because we're not exposed to microbes. We're not exposed to dirt. We're not exposed to animal feces. So we're just missing a lot of microbes. And our immune systems are pretty compromised as a result. They're not getting the right training. So part of what we want to do is rebuild our gut flora with fermented foods, with probiotics, with starchy tubers, which are like the food that helps the fermented food survive. And then we need to stop killing it off so much. And that's even more than just not taking antibiotics, but I would argue not drinking chlorinated water, not always taking antacids. We just do a lot that's impacting our gut flora and compromising the health of our gut. And then our immune system can't function well. We're chronically inflamed, and it's impacting our mental health.
And that's now the most convicting thing I've felt for myself with food. It's not just, oh, is this healthy or not, but I am feeding, in a good way, or I am, fighting my immune system. And that, gosh, especially after coming, through COVID and whatnot, it feels more concerning than ever. And so for me to look at, not that I don't deviate every once in a while and have my little treat or something, but to look at, man, everything that I put in and everything that I view, that I sense. Yeah. Whether it's doom scrolling or whether it's a bag of Doritos or whatever it's going to be, that I am bolstering or hampering my immune system, causing inflammation or not. And then right away thinking about, this is my mental state. I am feeding or fighting my mental state. I mean, ultimately that's the biggest message that I want from this show for myself and for everyone, is that that's our opportunity. Now, and again, you're so gracious in the book of saying that doesn't mean that you fix everything for sure. And I guess the bigger issue is people don't want to hear, oh, so my mental state and my problems, they're all my fault, which I do feel that way for myself, but can I do that with compassion? I'm also human, and I've got my own appetites and whatever, but I do tend to look at it as primarily my fault. I actually want to, because I want to feel like I have agency, but then I do understand how that can really be frustrating, especially somebody dealing with chronic illness and disease, chronic injury. And that, I do feel compassion for that. I have friends dealing with that. So
yeah, let's speak to that. So
okay.
You're right. There is a tension here. I think always about that meme that went around that was like, I'm going to take my stupid walk for my stupid mental health. And there was a while where, there was so much packed into that.
I can feel that. I'm the guy who's also, I want everybody here, who's doing all my stuff and I'm sleeping and I've got my routine and I'm talking about all this stuff. And then I'm extra irritated when I have a problem. Like, seriously?
This is part of why the standard disease model doesn't apply so well to mental health, because once we are inflamed and depressed, we're viewing everything through that lens. So even the idea of taking steps to improve our mental health, we're seeing through the lens of dysregulation, and we kind of want to hate it all. I think the stupid walk for the stupid mental health is, we're triggered by this whole message of diet and lifestyle. Here I am, like Pollyanna, being like, hey, I'm teaching everyone how they can leverage diet and lifestyle to improve their mental health and no longer identify as someone with depression and anxiety and eliminate immense lifelong suffering. But people don't like the message. And partly because it's overwhelming to make these changes, and it is hard work, and we're addicted to all kinds of stuff here, but partly because it is so invalidating and a little judgy and shaming, because I'm thinking it empowers people and gives them hope. People hear it as, oh, so you're saying it's my fault. So here's the thing. I actually am not saying it's any individual's fault. I think that our society has arrived at a place where normal mainstream choices are making us mentally ill. So I really kind of blame larger systems. And some of them did this nefariously and some of them did this accidentally. And then I think that even still, it's part of what's so interesting about mental health is that I've gone to bat so many times when someone's like, okay, your diet and lifestyle idea for mental health is all well and good. That's nice for someone who has like a little bit of stress. They're a little bit worried. Maybe they're a little bit down, but surely you don't mean that someone with true blue clinical depression or anxiety should just do it by diet and lifestyle. Surely there's a time and place for medication. Sure, there is a time and place for medication, but there is a fundamental fallacy to how we're thinking about mental health. We think that there's a categorical difference between being a little bit anxious and having clinical anxiety. And we think that clinical anxiety means you have the gene and you have the serotonin imbalance. False. These are on a continuum, but they still have the same root causes, which are either physical or psychospiritual. And it doesn't matter if you're a little bit anxious or institutionalized. If that has a physical root cause, which the majority of the time it does, we can keep barking up the wrong tree of Lexapro, but we're never going to get you all the way there, because that's an imperfect solution because it was never the real cause. And so we need to identify the actual root cause and address it. It seems too casual because the suffering is so immense. Someone's saying, how can exercise and blood sugar stabilization and eating a nutrient-dense diet where I'm getting enough B12 make me less depressed? Depression is heavy. It's profound. I've been there. I've been like, nothing could solve this. I'm too deep. I see the world as it is. This couldn't be solved with exercise. Turns out for me, it was solved by getting off birth control and gluten. So it felt heavy and profound. It was false for me. And I think that when we can sort of gently, compassionately understand that when we're seeing things through the lens of depression, things feel heavy, they feel intractable, they feel profound. And that doesn't mean it can't have a straightforward physical basis. And we need to kind of get over ourselves in those moments so that we can get genuine relief. All that said, there is true anxiety. So false anxiety is the low-hanging fruit. It's the quick wins. It's where we start, because what's the point in trying to address true anxiety when we're just getting kicked down every day by our false anxieties? Yeah. Once we clear the air, then we can tune in and say, okay, this anxious feeling is not because of coffee or a hangover or sleep deprivation. This anxious feeling, this is my purposeful anxiety. It's not here as some state of imbalance. This is my inner compass nudging me. It's asking me to slow down, get still, pay attention, and listen for what's out of alignment. True anxiety, it's not what's wrong with us. It's in many ways what's right with us when we are able to viscerally connect to the suffering in the world, when we're able to feel that electric shock of when we veer off of our path. So we want to listen to our true anxiety, and there's usually a call to action baked into it, where it can tell us, you need to course correct in this way in your life, whether it pertains to a relationship, a career, a way that we're advocating for our boundaries or our well-being, whether or not we're showing up for a cause that we believe in. Once we mobilize, we're no longer mired in that anxiety feeling anymore. We feel imbued with purpose. Things are moving. But true anxiety served a very important role along the way. And I think a particular shout out to people that are sensitive, is we have a world that says, why are you so sensitive? Why are you so dramatic? And I think some of us have a bigger antenna. I think we're feeling more. And that's not a bad thing. It's not something to pathologize. It's a high calling, but it's a heavy burden because this is a noisy world. So for those of us who are very sensitive and have a wide open antenna, we're going to feel a lot of true anxiety, but it's something to leverage, but also to take great care of through grounding practices, through a lot of self-care, early bedtime, sleeping 9 hours instead of 7 hours, being in nature, barefoot on the earth. We need a lot more grounding if we have a wide open antenna. And we probably shouldn't be like an actuary if we have a wide open antenna. We should probably be taking in those downloads and translating it into some contribution creatively, whether that means we're making art, making music, writing books. We need to be taking in what we're receiving through that antenna and passing it on, letting it be birthed through us.
I appreciate you bringing that to being sensitive, Ellen, because it's something that I actually had Andre Solo on the show a year or two ago. He and someone else wrote the book Sensitive, and they run on Instagram, got a really big Instagram account for the Sensitive Refuge, I think it is. But their focus was on highly sensitive people, HSPs. I read the book and resonated significantly. And it was kind of this may be why I live in a national forest. It wasn't just because it would be cool. It's because I am sensitive to sights and sounds and anxieties, and I feel anxiety prone. And so no wonder I've gone there, and it helped me give myself a little more permission to some of what I thought of as idiosyncrasies in my own life of trying to guard against. Because sometimes I felt like I don't know if I get credit for being disciplined and for all this stuff, but as we go along, I feel like I may be like one of the weaker people that I know, and I'm guarding for it because I can be taken out maybe quicker than most. I'm more sensitive, and so I do tend to live this kind of alternative lifestyle, which I did want to pick on that because you said just a moment ago, the normal mainstream choices that in essence can lead us astray. And it was, I feel like I'm being called to a lot of people I've had on the show. William Davis is a doc, and he wrote the book Undoctored. And in that, Ellen, the number one thing, maybe the only thing that at this point I remember, but it stuck out, is him talking like this and saying, yeah, speaking as you did, normal mainstream choices. And he's saying, well, I encourage you to make some different choices, like you are. Let's look at diet. Let's look at bedtime. Let's look at tech. And they were like, oh, so you want me to have one of those extreme diets, live extreme. And he's saying, no, I want you to realize that the way that we live today, our normal mainstream choices are extreme. To any other span of time, in history, what we're doing now, the way that we're eating foods that never mold or rot or whatever, that's extreme. That's never how we've lived. I want you to go back to where it was. And those shifts of looking at, for me, were really helpful because it can feel like, oh, I have to go be a weirdo. And kind of like, yeah, but the point is that we're all weirdos today. Let's go back to unweirdo-dom. Is that fair?
I love this so much. I think about how, I'm that snowflake about everything. And I'm a highly sensitive person living in New York City. Good luck to me. But but I'm on my path. So we're good. But my daughter, she has a very bad reaction to things like food coloring, red 40, all of this. We know it's carcinogenic. We know it's dysregulating. It creates inattention. We know it's bad. The evidence is there. But anytime I kind of push back on it, you get that message of like, just let her have her childhood. Let her have the snow cone or with the cotton candy. And it's like, well, let her have this like toxic, painful meltdown. Like it's extreme. What we're saying is normal. And I think it's important to recall, if we put human evolution sort of across the screen of our Riverside video, here's human evolution. And like this the width of like maybe a piece of paper is anything that we consider to be modern life, like processed foods. It's such a smidge. We have not genetically adapted to this at all.
Yeah.
So what we're doing now is what's extreme. And like to eat organic food, to go camping, all these super countercultural, active choices, more expensive choices that seem extreme. That is just the best approximation we can manage these days of living in a way that's closer to what we evolved doing. No moral superiority to this. It's just that we can't argue with millennia of evolution entrenching certain behaviors. That is my primary lens on everything with health, is like, well, hey, the system's not working. I trust this system of the human body to be generally well designed. I take issue with the knee joint, with menopause. There are some oddities where we're not perfectly well designed, but I think that for the most part, it's a well-designed system. So when it gets out of balance, it's usually reacting appropriately to a bad set of circumstances. So how do we get back to circumstances that our bodies know how to work with? Yeah. And that looks a lot like the conditions under which we evolved.
As you talk about your kid and the stuff, yesterday, true story, I go to pick up my kids, or a couple of them, and one of them, she's 12 years old, and she's holding a plate that she carried on the bus the whole way that has Chex Mix on it, pretzels, and a little cup of M&Ms and butterscotch chips. And she's looking at me sideways because and I'm going, oh my gosh. And so what's the story? And it was some class, and it was a prize. It was a gift. It was you've done well. And that's what they gave. And I'm looking at it and going, you gave my kid a plate of poison. I know that sounds terrible and weirdo, but I know that that's the kind of stuff and she's, is this politically correct? I don't even know if I can. She's, comes from a Native American, tribe. She's full blood. And has a propensity for diabetes and inflammation. I mean, I feel like it's so unfair in relation to my other, white bread kids that she has this to deal with. So it's even more toxic. We go from there to the high school homecoming parade, which my other kid is in. And what are all the floats doing? Throwing off candy. Just a myriad. And this is what I'm saying that with compassion. Yeah. Do I want to be the kid that says, oh, I'm grateful you got that as a prize, throw it away. And I've done that in the past. Today, I'm a little more lenient, but then last night, true story, she was a pill. We go home and she's dour faced. I can feel her spirit. She's frustrated, and it was just a poor night. And these things have a correlation. And yeah, so do I not squelch her fun and let her be a real kid? I guess so, because then the real kid, we're all used to that. And we complain about how they're little hellions. Man, it's so I have so much compassion, and I know that hurts to hear for a lot of people. We're back to tension of our culture. Yeah.
And I understand, we both know how we sound, and we've heard all the arguments. Yeah. I've heard the privilege case and sort of all the ways that this is so precious. And we wouldn't have to be having this conversation if we didn't have such a problematic food system, where we've sold out to the highest bidder, and there's really no eye towards health. It's very profit driven. I do think that it's worth acknowledging that we're threading an interesting needle when it comes to how to feed ourselves and our families, because we want to nourish our families. It matters. We want to do it without generating inflammation. We need to do it in a way that's convenient and affordable, where we share in food with the people that we love, where we have a feeling of ease and a light grip on it all. And what happens in our circles is that we start to go down the rabbit hole of, oh my God, this food is poison, this food is poison, this and this. And it's all true. It's really true. And yet then we start to fear food. We start to feel like our bodies are fragile. We decline social engagements to stay home and eat in a way that keeps us well. We become obsessive. Meal prep becomes a part-time job. And that's counter-therapeutic sometimes, because then we're obsessive and in fear and in fragility, and that's not helping either. I think that there's something here, which is, so there's a tension between these two issues, and we want to nourish our families. We don't want to be in fear, and we don't want to be in reinforcing fragility. It's a delicate balance to strike. I think the more we can just increase the pitch of the conversation around what we feed ourselves matters, means that it doesn't have to be a constant uphill battle for the choice to be real food. And right now, no one is trying to harm our children when they're sending them home with food coloring and candy. It just seems normal. It seems mainstream. We happen to know it is harmful. And I think that we need to increase the awareness that here's what's really going on there. And just to help us all know we've been so effectively marketed to, but we have to get down to a deeper level of truth when it comes to how do we nourish ourselves.
Totally. Ellen, I have been the militant dad and the butthole with the system. And, and there were times when we were vegan, we homeschooled, we have full control. We did that and we vacillated because, there's pros and cons and costs to everything. And now I think we tend to look towards kind of the 80-20 rule, ish. That I hope it's more than that, 90-10 or 95-5, but we do fudge here and there, and I let her have some of that stuff. And we also educate them and say, look, this is not something we do, but contrary to my older kids who are going to gripe about it and say, yeah, you just threw the stuff away. This one, they know that we don't do this, but you got that. I understand it's fun. Have a little bit, but we're going to moderate it. And so my wife calls us flexitarians now. And trying to, moderate the culture that we're in as well. Hey, thank you. This is, paramount. It's so important to me. And I feel like, I'm living it out, walking it out, trying to figure out the best way to function in this culture that we have today with the social media, with the tech, with the food, with the normal mainstream stuff that I wish wasn't normal, but we're all in it. And how can we do the best and support ourselves the best, give ourselves the best opportunity to not be living in this anxious state as I lower my shoulders and look at my candle and remind myself that I'm okay, I'm safe, and to function as such. And what can I do now as I go have lunch afterwards and feed myself and give myself the best chance to not be inflamed and anxious. And I'll be grateful for you in this conversation that we have had here and that we get to share it with a lot of people. Thank you, Ellen, so much.
Kevin, thank you. And I want to just bring this all back to perhaps like something that feels like it needs to be expressed, which is that at the very heart of true anxiety is that question. It shifts from how can I start feeling less anxious to what's my anxiety telling me? And our anxiety at the very root of it all is the inherent fragility of going through life as a human being. Yeah. And loss is part of our life. Uncertainty is part of our life. And I think this opens up big metaphysical, existential questions that we're in a current pendulum swing away from seeking, away from spirituality. And I think that that's where we just want to give ourselves permission to ask those bigger questions. Yeah. And perhaps there's something vastly beyond our comprehension occurring here. Perhaps there's more than meets the eye in this world. Perhaps loss is not so absolute. And maybe the worst case scenario isn't actually the worst case scenario. That's a tough one. We have to be on our own journey with that one. But when it all boils down to it, we come by these fears honestly, but I think we can re-examine what does seem to be the ultimate fear. And maybe we don't comprehend what's really happening here. One clue that I think we have is that belonging and social connection and community seems to be the most fundamental thing for human well-being. And so if we can prioritize that one above everything else, I think we're doing okay. And so thank you so much for this conversation.
Yes, and that we'll end with, I hear some foreshadowing, and I know you mentioned another book. So I feel a part 2 with you coming on whenever you're ready.
Part 2 is like a real left turn, but part 2 is called Season of the Witch.
I know. I heard that. I heard that. And I heard what you said there, and I'm tracking, I think. So I'm good with left turns. It's my show. I can do what I want,
That's right.
It's the beauty. Thank you. And I am eager to continue walking with you.
Likewise. Thank you, Kevin. Be well.
Friends, thanks so much for joining me on this drive. Again, that is Ellen Vora, MD. The book is The Anatomy of anxiety, understanding and overcoming the body's fear response, which again, that's what my muse was for the conversation you just heard. You can find the book anywhere. You can get Ellen at Instagram at Ellen Vora MD. Got a comment or question on this episode for myself, for Ellen? Let me know. Go to kevinmiller.co and connect with me there. Until next time, I hope this episode helps you drive further, and most of all, enjoy the ride.
Yeah.